Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachigian, and today I'm joined by Keir Wenham-Flatt. Keir is a strength and conditioning coach, consultant, and speaker. He is currently based in the U.S., where he most recently worked at the College of William & Mary, in addition to consulting with athletes and teams all over the world. As a rugby strength and conditioning coach, he has worked with 7 different professional teams in 4 different countries, including Las Pumas, Argentina, culminating in a 4th-place finish at the 2015 Rugby World Cup, the 2014 World Club Champions, the Sydney Roosters, Toshiba Brave Lupus in the Japan Top League, and the London Wasps in the English Premiership. He has consulted with a number of high-level teams and organizations, including Arsenal Football Club, Northampton Saints, Shandong Province Sevens, Oxford University Varsity Rugby, and Team Exos. He holds a master's degree in strength and conditioning and a bachelor's degree in sports science. Having worked at the highest level of collegiate and professional sports, Keir has great insight into the state of strength and conditioning and the direction the field is going. We talk about the role strength and conditioning coaches play in wins and losses on the field, the difficulty of objectively quantifying a strength and conditioning coach's worth to an organization with so many variables involved, and how to improve education for strength and conditioning coaches. We also discuss why Keir decided to leave the team setting and work for himself. Keir, thank you so much for coming on. So you've been very outspoken about the strength and conditioning as a system, and you have a lot of insights into how to make it better. But before we get into those things, would you mind just talking about a little bit about your work within the system, the level that you attained, and then why you decided to leave and work outside the system?
Oh, okay. Well, the usual, well, thank you for having me, I should say.
Yeah.
Very, very enthusiastic rugby player growing up. Was absolutely rugby mad. The first time I got the chance to try and play for a rep team, I made it. I was a very undersized kid when I was like 14. Didn't make it at 15. So I got cut after a year. And just a shout out to one of my rugby coaches back in the year 2000. His name's Norman Barker. And he unfortunately passed away last week, but I've told the story twice. And I said to him, Norman, why didn't I make it? And it was kind of harsh, but he said, Keir, they want big, strong, fast, fit rugby players, and you are none of those things. So after I pulled myself back together, I decided, right, I need to train. And I tried to train to make up for those deficiencies as an athlete. And I had another couple of cracks at making it as a rugby player, and it never really materialized. So I thought, right, well, I don't want a real job. I want to be involved in the highest level of sport that I can. So I decided to, as I got a passion for the training and the academics never really came difficult to me, I decided, right, strength and conditioning, sports science kind of thing. So I had a brief detour to start a degree in psychology. Because I thought I should have done something academic with my talents. And then I realized that I hated it and it was time to reassess. So I got a degree in sports science, graduated 2008, realized to my horror that I was a researcher, not a coach. I've never coached a group of athletes. And there's a very, very big difference in that. So I tanked in a number of interviews for pro sports organizations as an intern. And it took me 2 years of studying for a master's degree, working as a commercial personal trainer, and a lot of rejection at interviews to get the opportunity to work for free. So I started working as an intern in professional rugby in 2010. And I've basically been a strength coach ever since. So I did 2.5 years at London Wasps. I did a stint in the championship to get more adult experience, because when I'd previously gone for other jobs, they said, academy experience only. So I tried to plug that hole in my resume. I moved to Australia to go be poor and have a tan, as opposed to just poor. Very, very lucky. Did a volunteer stint with Argentina national team through a relationship I had with the Exos. And they said it could be 1 week, it could be 3 months. It ended up being 3 months, and they asked me to come back. And that stint actually led to me being offered a job in the NRL with the Sydney Roosters, which was a disastrous 6 months of my career. Some very, very hard lessons learned, but it culminated in me being my own replacement for Argentina. So I went back, saw it through to the end of the 2015 World Cup, where we kind of overperformed, and we were flavor of the month at the end of that, and that got me 2 years in Tokyo to cash out in the top league in Japan. And basically at the end of that, I decided, right, I don't want to do this anymore. So I started things in motion to move to the USA, and decided that I want to work in the NFL, and started in college football. So I worked at the University of Richmond, and then that got me hired to go to the College of William and Mary, where I was the coordinator of football performance until 1 month ago.
Yeah, and I only asked that just because, obviously you've got a lot of thoughts about the state of strength and conditioning, and a lot of people are very opinionated but haven't actually coached, and you've coached at the professional level, the Division 1 level. So just to kind of give more credibility to some of your insight. And obviously now you're not coaching anywhere, and you decided to leave college and professional sports and kind of pursue things on your own. So what kind of drove you to that decision?
I think there's a variety of things, but when I've spoken to my interns, my assistants, and when I've tried to advise them, because it's always easier to give somebody else advice because you remove emotion from the equation. And I always think that when you're looking at a job, we've called it the 4 P's sometimes: pay, personal, purpose, and progression. So does it take financial problems off the table? Does it build some kind of long-term security and the foundation that you want for you and your lifestyle at that time? Does it improve the relationships that you have in your life, or at least not make them any worse? Does it progress you towards a stated career objective that you have? Is it the next logical step for you? And do you derive a sense of purpose and meaning from the work? And I always say, if you have all four, you have the dream job. You should stay there until you die or get fired. If you have three, you should only leave for a job that offers all four. If you have two, actively be looking. And if you have one, you made a mistake. And just a variety of things that had kind of come together over the last year or so. One of which is, single parent now. It's just the fact that if you're going to be a strength coach, I think working in elite sport and you're going to have kids, you are going to be leaning heavily on a partner to help raise your kids, because the two just do not go together. And, I found myself in that situation last season. I had to fly my mother over on a day's notice to help me out. I was working 7 days a week, and it was, looking forward, could I have done it? I could have done it, but at what cost? And is it fair to my son for me to pursue that when I can be pursuing other things that allow me to be a bigger presence in his life and more available and all that kind of stuff? So that was the personal life. In terms of the money, thanks to the 2 years in Japan, I've not really needed the money urgently. I figured out when I left Japan, I could have not worked for 8 years and just about made it. I've had the money coming in online, and I've been lucky enough that that's started to bear fruit a little bit and gain momentum and grown in the last year. And if I'm really honest, it kind of got to the point where there was a competition for time between the private sector and the collegiate sector, which is okay, because I think certainly if you put all of your eggs into the basket of collegiate, you're setting yourself up to fail, because you can be fired at the drop of a hat. You're the CEO of you have a customer list of one. That business is run by an idiot. So it's important to have that diversification of where you get your money from. But if one of them is growing rapidly and the other one takes up 80 hours a week, it better be worth it that you're dedicating those 80 hours a week, because otherwise you're putting your foot on the brake of the other thing that's growing. And for me, I decided that was not the case. So in terms of the career progression, when I arrived in that job and said, right, I want to work in the NFL, the big, if I'm hiring me as a prospective coach in the NFL, I'd say, okay, well, you've never worked in this sport before, so you don't know what you're talking about. You've never managed a team before in any kind of level of football, and the right people don't know you. So going into that job, when the carrot was dangled in front of me, I've now taken all three of those things off the board. So a couple, to me, 2 years of doing a decent job is enough that I can do it. I do know enough if I surround myself with good people like Scott, who I've mentioned to you before, and, starting to build that network. And I'm lucky that there are, people within football that some of them do care about what I have to say about some kind of stuff. So like, there's people in the NFL, big colleges, stuff like that I've had conversations with in the last year. And that's been really, really good. But am I getting any more of it by staying in that job? No. And then the final one was, the sense of mission. And I made a real big deal out of when I went to work at the College of William and Mary. I got to work with Eric Coram, and 6 years previous, I was like holding up these documents in Argentina, being like, this is what we need to do. This is how we need to do it. What he laid out at Kentucky. And, if I'm honest, he's one of the few people that I could work for and not be rolling my eyes the whole time about, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And it was great to work with him. And he decided to move on. So that left. But then I still had great assistance. And then Scott got poached by the University of Arizona, and we pushed him out the door and said, this is a massive opportunity for you. You need to go. So he left. And unfortunately, those holes were not filled by the institution, which makes sense in a pandemic. But if your stated objective is true high performance and we're going to win championships, and then you effectively double the workload of people that are there and you turn into Gold's Gym, there's a disconnect between the two. And as I said many times, someone is going to win the league this year. It might as well be us.
Right.
And that vision was not shared.
Yeah. You talk about pay a little bit, and it seems like in strength and conditioning and even in physio, I would say there's kind of an aversion to talking about money, and there's a little bit of like a martyr complex. And I even see people, because we're kind of both active on Twitter in the field, people will say things like, well, if I'm hiring, for a strength and conditioning position, like if the person asks about money, I immediately disqualify them from the pool of applicants. And I'm kind of like, frankly, if I was interviewing somebody and they didn't ask about money, I would think they were like kind of an idiot. I mean, because it's like, it's really like, no matter how much you sugarcoat, like you should do this because you love it. Like that's a really important consideration. And if you're pragmatic and you want to support yourself and your family, money has to be discussed. So I actually kind of take the opposite extreme, and I'll say like, if I'm going to hire somebody like to work in our physio clinic, one of the first things that I would do is I would preemptively bring up money, because I know it's an uncomfortable subject. And I feel like the burden would be on me as the employer to bring it up. And like, let's be transparent about this, because I should be able to justify like why I'm paying what I'm paying, why I'm offering it. So, you've been in a position where you've hired other strength coaches.
Yeah.
Like what is your position on the money subject? Because again, I think people like, we don't want to talk about it, but it's kind of like politics and religion. If you don't talk about it, then it's going to be monopolized by the wrong people, that conversation. So
Yeah.
what's kind of your position on that?
Well, I'll tell you the reason why you're able to do it is because you are a private business, and you can demonstrate the value that an individual brings to your business. So
Sure.
It's like that Peter Thiel thing of you have to create X value and capture a Y portion of that value. And then what's left over is your profit as the business owner.
Yeah.
Within certainly the collegiate sector and even the professional sector, the reason they don't list the salary is because they're going to try and lowball that as much as possible, because it's so hard, I think, to demonstrate conclusively, this is the value that I bring to the organization.
Yeah.
I think if you do it in the collegiate sector, one of the biggest, most powerful things that you can point to and say, this is what I've influenced, is insurance claims and subsequent effect on premiums.
Right.
But it's really hard to point to one variable and say, right, this is what I control, because there's always going to be other people in peripheral roles that also influence that variable. When you're in a private business, it tends to be a lot easier in that you can have, customer reviews, you can have rates of re-injury, you can have, speed of return, all that kind of stuff. But the fact is that when you're kind of like dealing with that supply and demand of labor within the collegiate sector, the institutions know that there's such a level of competition that if you say no, for the most part, they could fill that job tomorrow. And they're actively encouraging that race to the bottom because it's short-sighted, but all institutions have an economic incentive to get the highest level of product or service they can for the lowest price.
Sure.
When the long-term view, in my opinion, is when strength and conditioning coaches or let's just say any members of interdisciplinary teams leave, the data leaves with them and the lessons leave with them, and you start again from square one. So it's an unfortunate fact, but that's probably going to be the likelihood. What you need to do is make sure that you keep, if you win with people, attract the best people and keep them there, because that iterative process of learning the lessons and improving year by year by year is what's going to lead you to a championship. And one of the ways that you can do that is by taking money off the table, by paying more than your competitors. So long term, I actually think it makes more sense to say, okay, if this is what I'm not sure if we're doing video, if this is what the industry's paying, we're going to go above that and we're going to make sure that you stay. So it's kind of like institutions being smart enough and having the discipline to accept a short-term hit for a long-term gain. But yeah, it should be in your interest as an institution to talk about money, because you want a quick no. You don't want to do your due diligence on someone and say, oh, tell me about this guy, go through his references, interview him twice and be like, oh, you're 20 grand under what I earn right now. You've wasted your time, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think like working at a clinic like ours for a physio would be a good experience, but I don't think that we're that special that like if we offer below market salary that we're worth working for. So, like no matter how much people can talk about these platitudes, like culture and building a team and a program, it's like we are compensated by money. And until we have a different compensatory scheme, like if there's not, like you said, like the incentives don't align, there isn't some kind of alignment between the salary and the experience, then it's all just, it's like I said, it's a platitude more than anything. But you kind of touched on the ability to demonstrate value, and in kind of like a truer free market where there's more competition, you can point to certain things. So I want to start like at a really basic level, like, and this is something you've talked about a lot. It might seem like an obvious question, but I think that we oftentimes overlook the obvious and we skip to, from step A to step Z. What exactly is it, do you think, that strength and conditioning coaches do to help athletes?
It depends on the level that you look at. This is the problem. All athlete stakeholders should pursue the organization's stated mission, which should be to win.
Yep.
The problem is that if your product is for everyone, your product is for no one. Sure. So you can go, it happens in Japanese rugby, it happens in the collegiate sector. It does not happen in professional sport for the most part, but say, oh, we want to win. And we also want to do good in the community. And we also want to educate people for the future. And we want to do this. And we want to do that. And we want to, generate revenue. And it's that millimeter of progress in a million different directions. But let's just assume that the mission is to win. So once you've taken that step, you say, okay, what contributes to winning? And it's going to be on-field performance, and it's basically going to be a PhD in your sport. And once you accept that fact, it's tough for strength and conditioning coaches to come to terms with, because it means sometimes the numbers that you love to hang your ego on will go down, but the results on field will improve.
Right.
So it can be very, very tough to do that. And it's like you have to simultaneously have the ability to zoom in and the ability to zoom out, because if you zoom in and there are areas that you have complete control over, or the illusion of complete control over as a strength and conditioning coach. So for example, maximal strength, even though recruitment, recovery, nutrition, stress load, and academics will all contribute to the ability to express strength. But let's say that you control strength. You can say, I've done a great job. Look at all these numbers go up. But then you zoom out and you say, well, actually, has this transferred to sprinting, jumping, cutting, and so on? And has this transferred to greater ability to execute the tactical technical game plan in attack and defense? And has that translated to on-field results? And this is the problem with strength and conditioning, because it's my belief that the easier it becomes to place a dollar amount on what it is that you do, the easier it becomes to command a certain price. So, for example, if you look at advertising, back in the day, mass media advertising, it was like spray and pray. Buy ads for Pepsi, put them on the TV, sales of Pepsi go up, buy more ads, repeat. But you can't pinpoint, and they say, oh, 50% of my marketing budget is wasted. If only I knew which 50%. So they say, oh, okay, was it this ad? Was it this ad? Was it this ad? Was it this time slot? Was it this message that worked? And they never knew. And that's why Google has been so powerful in disrupting advertising, because they leverage technology to answer those exact questions. So it was this ad, placed in this way, phrased in this way, with this call to action, placed at this time, that resulted in the greatest return on investment. And what's more, we can tell you to the cent how much it cost for you to acquire a customer. So before, with mass media advertising, if you say, all right, the cost per acquisition is $5, and you know that, we spend on average, $100,000 a month, and it brings in $200,000. You just basically like crossing your fingers. But now with Google, they say, all right, it costs $5 to acquire a customer, and we're going to charge you anywhere up to $4.99. You're still making money. So by improving, they're able to capture a greater portion of that value. And that's why Google have gone ahead. The harder it is to say, right, you're spending this, and here's what you're getting, the more onus there has to be on telling a compelling story to the person paying the money, right?
Yeah.
So it's not to say that it can't be done, because otherwise Louis Vuitton handbags would not be a thing. But they understand that if you're going to charge, I don't know what it is because I'm too poor. Let's say $5,000 for some luggage.
You're not a big handbag guy anyway, right?
$5,000 for some luggage that costs $100 to make. You better be telling a very, very compelling story to the person paying for it. And if you're dealing with a profession and a role where you cannot clearly point to it and say, I made that go up, or this is what I saved you, the onus is on you to tell a very compelling story as a strength and conditioning coach. And I don't think people are aware of that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're touching on what I think is a really important point. And that's, I think in the abstract, the right answer is like, yes, we want to help the team win. The problem, as you alluded to, is there's so many variables involved in winning. And I mean, if somebody like, as a physio, I would say like how I could contribute to a team winning is, look, I don't pick the talent, keep the talent available. So keep them on the court, on the field, but I don't control the sport practice.
Yeah.
I don't control the tactical strategic decisions in the game. I don't control what those athletes do when they go home, like if they're playing Nintendo all night or they're staying up all night and not recovering. So should we just throw up our hands and say, look, we can't objectively validate our worth, so we just have to tell compelling stories? Or is there a way, like if you had an athletic director come to you and say, what KPIs, what objective data, and I think that's even a problematic term, because what's truly objective, right? There's a huge subjective and a narrative component of it. And if somebody said, look, I don't care about your BS stories, like what data can you point to validate your worth so that I can be confident that I should retain you? And if you say, no, I don't have an answer, like that wouldn't surprise me, because I don't know if there's an answer, but how would you even attempt to kind of tackle that question?
I've thought about this, and it's like true objectivity. No, it's not going to happen. However, do you agree with the statement that if you go out on Saturday and they put 50 points on you, that as a collective, the system has not worked? Conclusively, yes, right?
Right.
So if we accept that kind of like interrelated nature of the system as a whole, we should be incentivized as a whole. So to me, it seems very, very messed up, because, a good strength and conditioning coach can make a sport coach look smarter than they might be, and vice versa. Typically in the other direction, you have a lot of sport coaches out there that make their strength and conditioning coaches look like geniuses. But if their fate lies in each other's hands, there should be incentives as a collective. So it's a broken system to me. I think you say, you see all these like coach contracts, like, oh, if you score this many points, this many touchdowns, this many games, if you make a bowl game, all of these guys over here are going to get bonuses, to the nth degree, and all of these guys are going to get absolutely nothing. So I think if it's good, if you accept the interrelated nature of sport performance and everyone is influencing everything, when they do well, you should do well. When they do bad, you should do bad.
Yeah, and you've talked about how like the harder that one's job is to quantify objectively, then the more you're contingent upon people actually liking you. And
Yes.
so, you often hear about, and there was a time even before I understood this stuff, and you've kind of brought a lot of this to light where, you'd hear about like strength and conditioning coaches who would attach themselves to a technical coach and like, this S&C coach is this head coach's guy or girl. And I used to kind of like almost resent that. Now I'm like, you know what? That's smart. If the
Yeah.
only if this is so based on kind of like narratives and stories, they're doing what they have to survive. And like really, I mean, you can make a case that getting a head coach to like you, especially a well-known and a prominent head coach, is probably way more valuable to your career than being able to get athletes to run
Yeah,
faster,
yeah,
jump higher, and squat more. Even though those things are important and they have some
yeah.
carryover to winning, from a survival standpoint, getting an important person to like you is probably the best thing you could do as a coach, which is kind of like, it's not what we want to hear, but it's, I don't know. Is that like, I feel like what's the reality, right?
It is,
Yeah,
but if you're going to ride it on the way up, you have to ride it on the way down.
sure. Yep.
So I know someone who, this guy was, in fairness to him, it's been a number of years, but my initial experience of his work and seeing the level of job that he got, you're like, there's like, this doesn't really make sense. But he was well liked by the right people, and the promotion track was this, and he just got dropped for somebody that has never worked a day in team sport, literally. And this is like high level sport. But whatever the person signing the checks decided was important, this guy's got it, you're out. So it's like, if you're willing to accept the downside, by all means enjoy the upside. Or you can say, I'm gonna try and position my affairs in such a way that if you like me, it's great, and if you don't, I'm still okay.
Yeah, and you and I have both been influenced by James Smith and the governing dynamics of coaching and kind of this
Yeah.
idea that there should be this seamless integration between physical preparation and technical and tactical. But does this exist anywhere that you've seen, or is this more of like a dream? Like we're all kind of chasing the dream, but unless you have total control, and like actually, one of the nice things about my setting, like outpatient sports physical therapy, is if I have somebody and they're not in season, I can actually do all those things.
Yeah.
I'm not like structuring their practice, but the kind of the pinnacle of our field is like to work in pro sports. But the irony of it is like in pro sports and even D1, you actually have less control and less oversight over all those things that matter. So is anybody actually like working in this kind of utopian environment, or is it more of just something that we kind of fantasize about?
I forget which one of the documents it is in the founding of the US, but they talk about like a more perfect union.
Yeah.
It does not exist. It doesn't mean you should throw up your hands and give up.
Okay. Yeah.
You can absolutely move more in the right direction.
Okay.
So this is the problem with particularly professional sport, is that when you work in professional sport, good things take time, but you're on a fixed duration contract and you better start producing results. Otherwise, you're never going to get the opportunity to see that project through to completion. So you have to strike the appropriate balance. But basically, you either need to set up the structure of the organization in such a way that you have somebody with the authority and the understanding of what needs to be done, or you're going to have somebody that's a master politician to firstly make those people, one, understand, because if you don't understand it, you can't implement it. Two, care, because just because they understand doesn't mean they agree with you or care. Three, have the technical understanding about how to realize that has changed in the real world. And then four, the self-control and the discipline to see it through. And those are four very different things, and they have to precede one another. So where I've seen it go wrong is that, and I've probably done it wrong. Yeah, I probably have. Yeah, coming and say, right, here's what practice needs to look like. Blah 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 blah, and all the things that you're going to say, like on the pitch, on the field, on the court, when the guy that's actually in charge doesn't know or care and thinks that he's right. It's typically a he. So again, it's like short term versus long term. You have to take the long term view, and you have to try to either select individuals that can step outside of themselves and look objectively at what is true and what's not true, or you have to set up a culture in such a way that people can be challenged on their beliefs, and as a group you can kind of like have the goal of arriving at the truth through discourse and debate. But it's like, I keep quoting Peter Thiel, but it's like if you have a 51-49 split, that's called a majority. If you have a 75-25 split, that's called a supermajority. And if you have a 99-1 split, that's called a dictatorship.
Yeah.
So the idea that there's not going to be disagreement and discourse is frankly bullshit.
Yeah. So I think once a strength and conditioning coach is like either working in college sports or pro sports, it becomes very difficult to like quantify the contribution to winning. But I think what's probably a little bit more clear to talk about, it's also something you've been outspoken about, is education for coaches. So in your opinion, kind of what's the low hanging fruit in strength conditioning education, and what's underemphasized and what's overemphasized in your opinion?
What's underemphasized is the understanding of what actually moves the needle. I get it. And, I had a conversation with Mike Boyle about this. I did a podcast elsewhere that he listened to. And he very nicely messaged me privately, and he said, you need to be extremely careful because you're talking about like what we do doesn't make a difference, and that you don't care about physical prep. And I think he misconstrued what I was talking about, which is not to say that we don't make a difference, but we help them buy the ticket to the dance. We're not doing the dancing. So it's understandable that you are gonna, just for reasons of self-worth and self-importance, that you're gonna place an oversized amount of importance on your area. Everyone does it. I'm winning this championship and blah 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 blah. But you see it all the time with strength and conditioning coaches will leave successful clubs and they'll remain successful clubs, or strength and conditioning coaches will stay and they'll experience a change in sport coaches and the fortunes will dramatically improve or decline. That should give you some kind of information as to just how influential you are on sport results. So understanding what truly moves the needle in sport performance, again, zoom in, zoom out. When you zoom out, what makes the difference? Money. That's it. Money and culture. The culture generates the money. But if you have, Manchester City have demonstrated this quite capably. If you have sufficient money, you can recruit, develop, and retain the best people. And it's the people, because some people are so good, if you just get out of their way, they're gonna succeed anyway. And then if you can take super talented individuals and make them masters of their sport, they'll do even better. So then it's tactical technical, and it's probably going to be psychological preparation, which again can be recruited and it can be developed, but basically minimizing the differential between your best day and your worst day should be the objective in the execution of the tactical technical game plan. And then it's going to be training those technical skills that are basically the building blocks of a game plan. And then it's just a case of adding intensity to those skills in the form of physical preparation. And probably more than that is to ensure robustness, because all things being equal, whoever practices the most wins. And there's a lot of caveats to that, but it's just true. There's a reason that Thailand is the best country in the world at Muay Thai, and it's nothing to do with their sports science. So it's because they kick people in the face from the age of 3, and they do it every day, and they have the talent pool. So if you accept that model, you have to accept the fact that you're actually very low down on the ladder of importance. You're on one of the bottom rungs. It's important because all things are not equal, and sometimes you're going to have a significantly better availability and all that kind of stuff. But you have to understand where you fit in the big picture, because it happens all the time. The guys, doing this, patting themselves on the back about, oh, we set all these PRs in season. Okay, at what cost? You've generated fatigue there that could have been dedicated to better mastery of the sport, which has a clear impact on game results. Look at physiological variables in season. A swing of 10% in season is considered huge. They stay fairly stable. A fluctuation of 5%, guys are going to be feeling pretty awesome or pretty shit. Yet the results in season vary wildly. So if the physiological variables are stable and the results vary widely, that tells you it's not physiological variables that are influencing results on Saturdays. So why would you unnecessarily spend energy that could have been dedicated to the stuff that does impact performance in season? So what needs to change in education is having frank conversations about just what it is you do, just how important it is to organizational, institutional success, and understanding how you can best impact the stuff that does matter. So to be discussing double knee bend in Olympic lifting, knee valgus in landing, all this kind of stuff, without understanding how to structure and periodize an on-field sport practice, or to communicate data to a head coach, or to identify sporting talent, or even the most basic level, to sprint, change direction, jump, land, throw, all this kind of stuff, we're putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, and so with that, when it comes to credentialing, you hear these stories about people getting rhabdo and dying running gassers and stuff like that. And oftentimes when we see those kind of incidents, there's like a call for more strict credentialing, more education, more oversight from centralized bodies. And I think that's always kind of the knee-jerk reaction. I don't necessarily know if that's what would make the profession better. How do we kind of reconcile, top down and bottom up processes to maintain quality, but without completely outsourcing education to like one or two governing bodies? Because I think that there can be a problem when only like one organization has complete oversight over education. We like to believe that like there's like this just master group of people who are highly enlightened and ethical and incorruptible, and that if we just give them total control, that things are going to be better. But I think that there needs to be some quality control, obviously, but people have to be kept in check, and I think that there's some need for bottom-up processes, which is what your strength network does. So how do we kind of reconcile that? Like, how do we make the profession better from a top-down and a bottom-up standpoint?
I mean, the big thing to me is like an uncoupling of accreditation and education. So we talked a little bit off air. Like I feel that there is a conflict of interest at the heart of governing bodies right now within strength and conditioning, despite the best intentions of individuals involved. Because the definition of a conflict of interest is you have multiple interests that have the potential for, or the actual conflict. So accrediting bodies serve the end consumer. They erect a barrier to entry to discourage charlatans and to ensure that whoever is consuming the product at the end of the day is protected. So there is an incentive amongst accreditors to raise the bar higher, because the quality of training goes up and it benefits the consumer, without talking about diminished supply and all that kind of stuff. But there's a reason people want the UKSCA accreditation and they want the CSCS and they want this and they want that, is because it's scarce. The value comes from the scarcity. Because what's happened now? Now we have the emeritus. We have this level and that level. You know why? Because guess what? The CSCS is not special anymore. And the UKSCA is doing a master accreditation because it's not special anymore. So the accreditors have an incentive to make it scarce and valuable. Educators serve people taking the accreditation. If you're an educator, you are providing guidance to help people navigate that process so that more people can pass and they tell their friends and it brings more business through the door. And then you do that and you keep going and going and going and going. So accreditors want less people to pass. Educators want more people to pass. If you are a governing body that oversees accreditation and education, you simultaneously are okay with the fact that more people pass and less people pass. So if we're aligned, you're a coach and I'm that governing body. If you pass, congratulations. You're going to tell your friends and bring in more money for the education that I'm going to benefit from. And if you don't pass, it benefits the consumer and it benefits me as the gatekeeper because I've ensured that the qualification remains scarce and valuable. So if we play and every single time, whether you win or lose, I win, that's an asymmetrical relationship to me that should not exist. So, the reply is, we said, we're a non-profit. Well, just because you're a non-profit doesn't mean that you don't want revenue, because revenue is a great way to perpetuate your own existence, to maintain a dominant force within the industry, especially if you're the gold standard. Why would you want competitors coming in to take that away from you? So the idea that people operating within a non-profit do not have incentives is flawed. And the idea that, well, in the free market, anyone can help coaches prepare for this accreditation or this assessment. But the fact is, if you write the test paper and you sell education, you're an inherent advantage compared to other individuals in the marketplace. It's a monopoly. Because if I'm blind and you know the answers, who do you think is going to have an easier job of reverse engineering the process of educating coaches to pass the accreditation? Sure. So if nothing else, to me, there needs to be an uncoupling of those two things. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but and then when there is an uncoupling, then there's also kind of this aversion to people, who do set up their own education courses where it's like, well, this guy's like trying to profit off of education. But then, like you said, the alternative is now you have, the governing bodies monopolizing the education and the testing. And they're, like profits become a dirty word in our field, even if you put out a good product. Again, we talked about, I don't get why there's like this aversion to making money, and we kind of romanticize working, 80 hours a week for no pay. But for someone like you who's very transparent about the fact that you make money off your courses and your products, what is your emphasis? Because obviously, I don't think you would agree probably with everything that's emphasized on some of these tests. Your goal is probably more to just create what you think is the standard of what a strength coach should be. So when you put out a product, is your emphasis more on like getting people to pass some of these tests, or is it on what you would want, what the kind of person that you would want to hire and cultivating that type of person? Like what drives your decision making?
It's the latter.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I was trying to think how to phrase this. Like in the private sector, the profit motive is an incentive to innovate. Now, I'm not like, I forget which economist it was, but it's like, the private sector is not going to solve everything. And the public sector is not going to solve everything. But the profit motive is the incentive to compete. So I put it out to Twitter, along with that reasoned article about conflict of interest. I said, what have been the major developments or changes to the UKSCA assessment day in the last 10 years? And I got no bites. And somebody privately messaged me and said, 0. There have been 0 changes. These are the same people that for 10 years have been saying, oh, well, we need to reform this, we need to change this, we need to do this, we need to do that. And yet there are no changes. Now, I can tell you 10 changes that I've made to Strength Coach Network in the last year. Because guess what? In a pandemic, you can't see who's naked until the tide goes out. The tide went out financially this year, and everyone's like, oh, I'm living in a house built on sand. So now everyone wants to join private education. And I'm like, well, Am I going to let that happen, or am I going to try and innovate and put out a better product in Strength Coach Network to fulfill needs within the market? So if you know that employers only care about your qualification and it's unlikely to change, what motive do you have to significantly ramp up your level of innovation and development and refinement of the product? As you don't have to. So it should be, look at SpaceX. SpaceX is a private company that somehow managed to launch a rocket into space for 5% of the cost of NASA. That's the impact that competition can have. Which again, if there's an uncoupling between accreditation and education, the accrediting body can say, you know what, this organization, this business has jumped through sufficient hoops that we feel their course or whatever, or their materials constitute a sufficient level of qualification. You can prepare them with education. We're going to do the test. Once that would happen, to me, the standard of education would significantly rise within strength and conditioning. I am not going to train people how to prepare for a qualification that I feel ultimately is of little to no value. And certainly not when, like I said, it's a bit of a monopoly.
Yeah, and that profit motive is powerful. I mean, if you look at even what the private sector has done with their response to COVID, like look at what the NBA did, how they managed to pull that off. And granted, that's not scalable, but that's not the problem the NBA had to solve. They had to solve their own problem, and they did. I look at all of these restaurants in New York City doing outdoor dining. They have tents, they have partitions, now they have heaters, because if they don't do it, they're going to go out of business. And I often wonder, like, what would the response to COVID have been, if we were going to suspend politicians' pay and suspend their pensions? I feel like, there'd be much more robust response than what we've had. And right now they can just point the finger at other parties, or, the state people can point the finger at the feds can point the finger at the states. They can bankrupt future generations. But, a small business owner or a corporation that is self-interested cannot do that. So, there's got to be obviously, some balance between public and private sector responses. But kind of on that note, because you've kind of worked in both settings, what do you think that the private sector in strength and conditioning can teach team settings and vice versa? Like, what do they both do well, and what can they each learn from one another?
No, I think my biggest gripe about the public sector is it is almost impossible to get fired. Almost impossible. Especially state institutions. It's kind of different in an elite level sport, but like this idea that basically once you're in, you're in. Because it kind of like when you, within reason, when you don't feel that pressure about, hey, I need to produce, or, I'm not really being objectively measured and it's mostly about being liked. As long as you're one of the good old boys, you're never going to get fired. And there needs to be risk and reward. So what I feel happens well in the real world is when you expose yourself to large amounts of risk, like you're a business owner, you're going to expose yourself to the reward of, hey, the business has gone well and we're making a lot of money. But guess what? If it doesn't go well, you're going to go out of business. So you've exposed yourself to the upside and the downside. Within reason, in the public sector, there is very little downside, or you're a lot more insulated against the downside. There's what the public sector does well is, I think, when you have large amounts of money, large resources, large networks, you can create bigger, possibly more successful systems, as opposed to like you're scrabbling away like sweat equity in the private sector, like, oh, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? Like when you're moving like large amounts of people and money, you can gain momentum more quickly. But one of the biggest things that I when I was at William & Mary, somebody asked me, what's your strategic plan? And I sent it and I got no reply. But one of the things was, no more permanent employees, because permanent employee means I'm disincentivized to push hard because I know that I'm going to have a job regardless. And I'm also not going to see significant reward because there's no bonus system in place. So, did you win? You get to keep your job. Did you lose? You get to keep your job. So I don't care on the downside, and I'm not motivated on the upside. So one of the things I said was fixed duration contract, heavy incentives in agreed upon key metrics. Because what happens in college sport is they'll change the metric according to the argument that they want to make. Coming in, your job is to win. You start trying to win and upsetting people in the process, and you say, hang on, nobody likes this. I said, I thought you told me to win. I think it's primarily that, which is like, if you do win with people, you need incentives to attract them. You need to cultivate them and spend money, and you need to incentivize them to stay. And it isn't always about money. Like I've talked about Saracens in UK rugby, where the wage cap in French rugby, it may be the same now, but at the time that I had the conversation with somebody, the wage cap was 4 times higher in France than it was in the UK. So they can't pay the money officially. They've been a little bit shady, but they made a point of when they recruited players from France, and I know a number that signed there. The first thing they said was, hey, we can't match the salary, but we're going to put on lunch for the wives every day. We're a family. You're going to bring your family in. We're going to all eat together. We're going to take all these trips. We're going to put you through college so that you're set up at the end of your career. We're going to provide childcare. If there's anything that we can do for your wife, put them in a social setting, stuff like that. And they said, we're going to compete on everything that has nothing to do with money. And I feel, as a private business, that's one thing that I tried to do at William & Mary. So, hey, we got no money. Okay, how much is it to go get a couch so that they got somewhere to lie down? Let's make the showers nice. Let's do this. Let's do that. If we can get them out of the building half a day per week to go work on a personal project, that's something they're not going to get anywhere else. That's one thing that I tried to do.
Yeah, and on that note, as far as like, when your budget is constrained and how to improve the quality of lives of the people on your staff, one thing I've heard you talk about that I really haven't seen anybody else talk about is kind of the logistical and the equipment setup, and how that you can if you do that properly and efficiently, you can actually free up people's time, so they're not coaching 7 groups of athletes every day. They have more time for professional development, more time to spend with their families. So can you elaborate on that, and just how even the design of the weight room and what equipment you buy and where you decide to put said equipment, how that can actually create just a better overall quality of life and a better training experience for the athletes and the staff?
Well, I mean, it boils down to the idea that, let's say, we've already talked about innovation, research, development, driving forward, all that kind of stuff. In the real world, the guy putting the rivets on the rocket for SpaceX is not in the research and development department. They're 2 separate departments. So you have guys that work in the system, build the product, build the service, put it out to the consumer, fulfill that side of the business. And then you have departments within the business where your job is to put yourself out of business before somebody else does. How are you going to drive this product forward? How are you going to make it better? So, for example, having a rocket that lands vertically. My guess is the guy that came up with that was not the guy that was doing the rivets on the rocket. Unfortunately, in sport, you're expected to do both. So is it good and necessary to have a high energy program with attention to detail where you're checking all the boxes and you're very diligent in training? Absolutely, yes, it is. However, you also cannot have a program that stands still and never innovates and never develops and never pushes the boundaries of sports science and stuff like that. So there's a need for both, and you must make time to do that. Otherwise, the competition is going to get ahead of you. And right now, the industrialization of strength and conditioning means that you have guys that are on the floor for 8+ hours a day, and then the rest of the day is meetings, admin, and blah blah blah. They are constantly working in the system, not on the system. So you must invest time, money, and effort into working on the system. And one of the ways that you can do this is by either increasing staff, which is more expensive and harder to do, or you can make tweaks to facility design to decrease the number of sessions that have to be done per day. And this is primarily in football. You should be trying to increase the number of athletes that you can get through per session without a drop in quality. So typically the limiting factor is going to be racks and floor space. So I did this design with Scott at William & Mary. Have you ever seen, I'm going to give a shout out, Black Box in Belfast? My friend Greg, it's his company. They've developed power racks that fold into the wall completely flush. They have plate storage that's completely flush, and they have bar storage, which is the same. So if you have that with inlaid platforms and you put everything flat to the wall, at William & Mary, I can tell you for a fact, you would have doubled the width of available space. And if you're doing indoor speed work, dynamic warm-up, all that kind of stuff, you significantly bumped up the number of people that you can get through the door. If you take floor space of equipment, taking equipment which can get more athletes through at one time. So for example, I think a power rack, a well-designed power rack can get 4 to 5 athletes working at one time within a reason, if you kind of allocate like rest periods and stuff like that. A 4-way neck machine is quite frankly useless in that regard. And it takes up quite a lot of floor space. Same with, a jammer. The jammer is the world's most expensive clothes rack or, band storage. So just having little decisions like that it's eyewash in terms of recruiting and, oh, look at all the money that we spent and this guy gets to put his name over the door. You've actually upset the session flow and increased the number of athletes that you can get through the door at one time. So I would rather work backwards from that logistical standpoint, and then flooding the floor with all of my staff for a few hours of high concentration, high energy, organized chaos, and then rest and work on the system rather than in the system. Because right now what happens is you have this carousel of group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, group 6. If my kid was in group 6, I would feel shortchanged.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And like I said, you don't hear a lot of people talk about that stuff, but yeah, it almost seems like a lot of these weight rooms are used for recruiting and to kind of tantalize people, but then, they're going to be using it for 4 years. And to your point, people might squat for 15 minutes out of an hour-long session.
Yeah.
But if you can fold those racks up into the wall, now the other 45 minutes of the session, you've doubled, like you said, doubled your space.
Yeah. Never ask the barber if you need a haircut. If you ask Sorinex, how should I spend this $5 million? They're not going to tell you, get 30 racks that can fold against the wall and use the rest of the stuff as like space. They're going to be like, oh, you need 5 of this, 5 of this, 5 of this, 5 of this. And it's like,
yeah,
facility design needs to work backwards from what it is you're trying to achieve, rather than facility design being primarily driven by the donor, an administrator that has no experience of training athletes, and the equipment manufacturer. This is not to say that they are being underhand, but I don't feel quite that they're fully serving the needs of the institution.
Yeah, and then would you mind just closing by talking a little bit about Strength Coach Network and some of the educational resources you have on there? I've got to say, I just actually purchased your speed template. I'm kind of combing through that. So
I was going to give you that for free. You shouldn't have bought that.
Yeah, honestly, like my thing on that is when I have podcast guests, like you guys are giving me your time, the least I can do is buy your products because I would buy it anyway. And
thank you.
Like I want people to be rewarded for putting out good work. So yeah, I would not have accepted it, but thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, man. It was like when I reflect on what I struggled with when I was trying to come up, and when I reflect on what it is that's maybe made the difference in my career, that's allowed me to get ahead, or when I look at people that have got ahead faster than me, I kind of try and work backwards in that and say, what is it that they had that I didn't have? And it was a network of people in the right places that could open doors for me. It was a strategic attitude to my career development and being able to when opportunities present themselves to like knock it out of the park. So I don't want to be going into an interview blind or, submitting a resume or a cover letter, stuff like that. I want people that have done have done it before, been there, got the t-shirt, know exactly what they're looking for to tell me, hey, you need to do this. And it was access to people that actually made their living training athletes in the real world rather than being academics. Academia has a use, but if I'm working with athletes in the real world, I want to speak to the most successful individuals in the field who do that. So it was, practical information that you can put to use in the real world and ask questions of these practitioners. I'll give you an example. We just got one submitted by Wade Van Neerkerk's strength and conditioning coach. So most people in their lives never get to speak to anyone associated with a track and field world record, let alone see exactly what they did and ask all the questions. And that's why we brought it in. And then I think that kind of like community, being able to just ask people from all over the world, every level of sport, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And it's like basically providing coaches with an opportunity to learn and test their ideas in the real world rather than exist in their bubble of 4 or 5 assistants to say, oh yeah, boss, good idea. And that's basically it.
Yeah, cool. And I'll put a link to that. Like I said, I mean, I'm consuming some of your products myself, and I think it's a great resource. And like you said, with the free market, if you don't like it, don't buy it. But you've got skin in the game. You put yourself on the line, and like I've got to kind of, my time is finite too, and the fact that like I'm combing through some of your resources speaks to that I think they're valuable. So and again, like I don't take any freebies from people, because when I have guests on, I want them to know that like I actually read through some of their resources and their books, and that I paid for it. And the fact that I paid a price for it and I'm willing to talk about it with somebody means that I think it's valuable. So thank you.
God bless you.
And, yeah, look forward to just seeing what the future holds for you. I'm excited that you've freed up some time, and that gives you more time to work on the system, which we're all going to benefit from.
Thanks, man.
All right, thank you.
As a thank you for listening, we'd like to offer a 10% discount on all products at resilientperformance.com. Please use promo code PODCAST at checkout. That's PODCAST. And I also encourage you to sign up for our mailing list to receive exclusive articles only available by signing up. Thanks for listening.